In this video, we're going to be replacing the idle air control valve on this 2005 Honda Element. Our negative terminal here, 10mm nut. Go ahead and back that off now. And set that aside. So our intake tube here goes from our air box down to our throttle body. And everything in the middle here is connected. So we're going to start disconnecting things from our intake tube. We're just going to pull them right out. All right, so just keep working these out. This here runs all the way down and around, so we're going to remove this hose just by pulling it straight off and set that aside. This harness here, if you follow it around, will be connected to an electrical connector in the back. We'll just remove that now. Set that aside. If you follow this down, this is actually in one of these little rubber wire holds here. Just remove that. Working up here, we have this connection. I'm going to remove this hose clamp. And this is going to come off. This piece here will come off. Sometimes just needs a little help breaking it free. We'll just use a pair of pliers here and try and spin it a little. Just peel it right off. Now that looks like mostly everything that's connected to our intake tube. These cables here, if you follow them up, are in these little clamps. We'll just pull these up and out. And just move these aside. They are going to kind of rest where they want to rest, but they are disconnected, which is nice. So now what we're going to do is remove our hose clamps on the bottom of our intake tube where it meets our throttle body. So down here we have our hose clamp, and we're going to remove this. This one's going to be an 8mm. So we'll back out and loosen up that hose clamp. You can also see right next to it, we have our throttle position sensor harness. If we remove our throttle body, our throttle position sensor will be attached to it. So we're going to unplug that now while we're here. I'm going to set that plug aside. Now we're going to move up our intake tube to our air box, remove the front cover of our air box, and that'll allow us to take the front cover and our intake tube out of the vehicle. Now up top here, we have a Phillips. We have what should be an 8mm or a Phillips. I like to use the 8mm so we don't strip it out. Also, if you go look at the top one, it looks like there is no Phillips in there, and it may just be a rounded out 8mm. So we're going to do our best to remove these guys here. We are also missing one on the other side. Yep. And there's one down the bottom. We're still held in by the top one, so we'll need a pair of locking pliers to back that one out. All right, so with a pair of locking pliers, we'll back out this screw here, or this bolt. Okay, with what should be 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts removed, you should now be able to lift your intake tube and front of your air box up and off. While doing that, we're going to twist a little bit and remove it from our throttle body. You can now take this out of the vehicle. So now our goal here is to remove our throttle body. So we're still going to need to remove some things around it before we get there. We're going to start with these lines here. There's 2. All right, so there should be hose clamps on here. It looks like they've rotted off, The one on the bottom isn't even tight, but it is there, and I think part of it's rotted away. Yep. So I need to replace those while we get into the reinstallation. Now we're going to take our needle nose, see if we can spin these hoses to break them loose. Oh, we'll see if we can get to that once we take these off. So at this point, we're messing with coolant. So if your system's full of coolant or your system's hot, you're going to want to take caution. We have a drip pad down now underneath here, a little absorbent pad. You should expect to see some coolant come out of here. Just be prepared for that. Okay. Now on the hose underneath it, we're just going to do the same thing. We're just going to see if we can break that seal free on the hose and pull that hose right out. All right, so we have another hose on top here. We'll just squeeze that clamp. Move out of the way and see if we can get our hose to come off. Now this is an odd clamp because it's already squeezed. There we go. So now from here, we have a couple of main pieces holding our throttle body, and there's going to be 4 bolts. And we have our cables here, our throttle cables and our other cables here. So what we're going to do here to get these loose and free of this bracket is actually take the bracket off. Somebody's been here before us, and they've taken this harness out of this clip, and they didn't put this bracket bolt back in. So in this case, it's going to be a little bit easier to remove this bracket. So we're going to go ahead and do that. It'll be a 10 millimeter. So now we have 2 bolts removed, and our bracket is now free. So what this will allow us to do is get to the underside a little bit easier and get to those bolts or those nuts on the backside here if we need to. By what I mean by if we need to is we're going to continue along now and remove the throttle body and see if we need to disconnect these from the bracket or if we can disconnect them from the throttle body itself. This whole piece rotates. We may be able to disconnect the ends at the throttle body. So if we follow our throttle body to the bottom side, you'll see we have 1 more plug and a harness connected to this bracket here. So we're going to remove both of those now. Just going to use a pair of needle nose pliers, see if we can squeeze this harness clip and push it back through. To remove our throttle body from the vehicle, we have 2 12 millimeter nuts and 2 12 millimeter bolts. We'll go ahead and remove those now. Now at this point, you can remove your studs or nuts, bolts or nuts. We can now remove our throttle body. Now if you remember, we still have things attached to it, so we're going to have to address those. The first thing we're going to do is get it into a working area here where we can unplug our electrical connection on the bottom here. All right, so we're just going to use a pick tool and get in here underneath this clip. Let's see if we can't remove this plug. There we go. Now with that removed, we have a little bit more freedom here. So now we have our throttle body out of the vehicle as much as we can. You should be able to take yours completely out of the vehicle. Ours has been modified. So to remove our idle air control valve, we can see we have 2 Phillips screws. We're going to go ahead and remove those by hand. We don't want to strip these out. So your idle air control valve, you can see it's now free, wants to come off, which is good. I'm going to peel it off. What you should have is your gasket stay on the throttle body side. Now we have the gasket on the throttle body side. We're going to use a small pick tool here to pull these out. We're not trying to damage the gasket, we're just trying to remove it. If you decide to use a small flathead screwdriver, that's fine too. So there you have your idle air control valve and gasket. So now we're going to install our idle air control valve. First thing we're going to do is put our gasket in place. You can see there is a right way and a wrong way to put your gasket on. Our gasket's going to go in place. Just going to tap it down. There is a recessed area that your gasket's going to sit into. So now that that's nice and flush, we can take our valve, position that over our gasket, line up our screw holes. We're going to start these by hand, just to make sure we're in and lined up. Okay. You can see the modules moving around a little bit. We're just going to try and keep it tight to the throttle body while we tighten these screws down. That way there your gasket stays in place and doesn't have the opportunity to jump out and create air leaks. I'm just going to snug this one up. We're going to come over here and snug this one up, and then we'll tighten them both down. So now we're ready to take our throttle body and put it back into the vehicle. Before we do that, while we have it in this position here, we are going to roll it over like so. We're going to take our 2 throttle cables, one for our cruise control and one for our gas pedal, and we're going to take the ends, put them into their respective slots. All right, so just doing this one hand, what I'm going to do here is just get them tucked in, and then we'll put them all the way in. All right, once they're all the way in and the cables are in the center there, what we're going to do is rotate while keeping the cables in their slots. All the way around. So now we're ready to take our throttle body and lower it into the vehicle. What we're going to do is take this bracket here with our throttle cables in one hand, along with our throttle body, and just rotate it into the position it's going to go down onto the studs. Before we do that, we have a gasket that we need to put in place. We're going to lower our gasket down onto the studs. And again, before you put your gasket on, just make sure this surface is nice and clean and free of any debris. Once you've done that, we can lower our gasket down. And now we can lower our throttle body onto those studs. And just press it down. Make sure we're all the way down even. This bracket is going to end up going up here on our intake. So we're just going to move it out of the way and swing it over there for right now. Now from here, what we're going to do is drop in our 2 bolts. They're going to go opposite of our studs. We're going to start those by hand. Just get a couple of threads going. Sometimes these are a little tough to get going by hand. If you need to, go ahead and use a socket on an extension. And then we'll also put our 2 nuts on our studs. And we'll come back and we're going to snug these down. We're going to do it in a crisscross manner. That way we bring it down nice and flat. Again, just snugging them up. We'll come back and torque it down. Happy little bolts. So now that our throttle body is snugged up, what we're going to do is mount our bracket for our throttle cable. We're going to mount that just to make sure it's out of our way while we're torquing down our throttle body. So there's going to be 2 bolts here. Now you'll notice that I'm holding back one bracket with a wire harness attached to it. That typically would be attached to this bracket. There's a space for it right here. Our vehicle didn't come with that attached. You can see the amount of rust and corrosion where the bracket should be. So what we'll do is we'll try and put a bolt through here, but if you had removed that, now would be the time to reinstall it. Again, just be careful not to drop anything into the throttle body. You don't want that to fall into the intake. So now we're going to tighten up these bolts here for that bracket. And with that bracket out of the way, 100%, we'll come back and we'll torque down our throttle body. So now we're going to come back, we're going to torque our throttle body bolts down to 16 foot-pounds. And I do have a little swivel on the end there to get in at an angle. So the first thing we're going to do, because we have access now, pull back this hose here, and we're going to plug in our electrical connection for our idle air control valve. It's going to be this gray plug. And the tab for the lock is going to go down. And now we can start to connect our hoses. This one that we have pinched off is going to go on the bottom. Before we remove that clamp, because there is coolant in that line, we're going to connect our other hoses. This one's going to go here. And our top hose is going to go right here on the top. Now we can start tightening down our hose clamps. Now our hose clamps are going to be different than yours. All of our old hose clamps were either missing or fell apart. So we're going to use 1/4 inch on our hose clamps. Yours will be different. Slide our other hose clamps on. And while doing this with the hose clamps here, try not to put them up against your throttle body because you will be putting your air intake tube right onto that. So leave yourself a little room. Okay, now we can unclamp our line. And then we have our throttle position sensor, needs to be plugged in. Right there. And then the other end of this cable will go into your air intake. All right, so we can put our bracket in here. This bolt may be different than the one you have. Ours was missing originally. All right, and then this hose here is going to go right back in there without this. So somebody's been in this vehicle before because we have this cable zip tie that's been cut, but your harness for your injectors would be in there, in that bracket. Now for us, what we're going to do is probably just put a zip tie through that just to hold it in place. Right, so we're going to remove this old clamp here, this old zip tie cable. A little trick here, that's a tight spot to pre-bend your zip tie in a U shape. And then feed it down through. It will be easier to grab on the other side because it'll come up towards you. And we can just lock that cable to the bracket. Again, we're not looking for extremely tight there. You don't want too much friction, too much pressure to wear away that. Just tight enough to hold it in place. And clean up the end. Roll that sharp edge away. You're done. So now we can reinstall the top of our air box. Now, as we were removing it, it started to fall apart. Now this one's actually frozen and rusted in place. This one's moving freely. This one's also moving freely. Ideally, these would all be fine, or ideally, we'd have two opposite sides. So this one should slide in and out of this center, or this sleeve here. It's not moving at all, so which just means it's frozen. You can try and press it back in here and reuse it. For right now, to move forward, we are going to reassemble with what we have. So we're just going to put this in place. Okay. And with an 8mm socket, we're going to tighten down. It's not an 8mm socket, but it is, but it isn't. This one's actually stripped out, so we'll try and use the Phillips head option on that. No, so there's a lot of corrosion in the Phillips area there. So we're just going to have to try and spin this closed with a pair of pliers or locking pliers. All right, so we've got a pair of locking pliers on here now. The reason we're doing this is the head on this is stripped, so it won't take an 8mm. It's too big for a 7, and the Phillips option is rusted in. Now ideally, we don't have any air gaps here or any air loss coming through the sides here, so we may end up coming up with some solution for these two. For right now, we're going to continue moving forward and reassemble. Now the last piece to our air box is the intake tube that goes from our throttle body to our air filter. What we're going to do is push this down onto our throttle body to start. And if you remember, we had a broken hose clamp that was actually rotted out, so we had to replace it. So we now have a new hose clamp. Now we can put our intake tube onto our throttle body. Now I'm just going to loosen up our hose clamp just a little more. Now for this, we had to put two hose clamps together. If you can find one hose clamp the right size, ideally that's a better situation. There we go. So we're going to spin. Actually going to remove this slightly and spin our hose clamp so we have access to tighten it down. And now we can start to locate the upper end onto our air box, or our filter housing. We've got a little notch here that we have to line up. And we're going to have to put one more hose clamp up around here. We'll do that at the very end. Okay, so now that we're lined up, top and bottom, we're going to tighten down our hose clamp on our throttle body side. Again, 8mm on this specific hose clamp. Yours might be slightly different. And now from here, we can start to reattach our hoses and our lines that are attached to this part of the intake tube. We'll start here. We're just going to press this line in and then push this onto this hose barb here. Now on this side, we have a few more lines. We'll start with this one here. We're going to need a pair of long needle nose or a pair of needle nose. Squeeze this clamp and reattach this line. Just press it right on. Now we can put our hose clamp back in. All right, now this line, I'm just going to press in. This one already kind of fell into place. It's just going to press in. All right, so our electrical connection that we tucked down here earlier, we're going to pop this right back into its little holder. And we're going to run our electrical line under those cables, come around, and plug it back in. All right, now if you really want to, you can pull it back, and just tuck away that line. Now from here, if we follow these two lines up and backwards, we're going to put these back into place. Your thicker line is going to go into the lower lock here. We're just going to press it right down in. And the upper line, same thing. It's going to go on the top. Just get pressed right in. Sometimes you need a little extra help. Just use a pair of pliers and we'll squeeze that down in. And that's it. All right, so up top here, we were missing a hose clamp to start. So again, we put a couple hose clamps together to get the size that we needed. There you go. Everything's back to normal. We're up here at our radiator cap. What we're going to do is remove our radiator cap and we're going to fill our radiator. All right, so we can put our cap aside, drop our funnel in. So you're going to want to fill this up to the top. Then you're going to want to run your vehicle. You're going to want to cap it first. You're going to want to run your vehicle to operating temperature and let it cool down and recheck your radiator coolant level. At that point, if you need any more coolant, go ahead and add it to the top. You may want to repeat the process once or twice just to make sure you're totally full, and you're good. And the same thing on this side, just push it straight down and tighten our negative terminal down as well. Try and give that a twist. Make sure nothing moves, and you're good.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.